Welcome back to the Chainsaw Man Comparison Series, now in episode 11, which covers the last page of chapter 31, all of chapters 32, 33, 34, and some of chapter 35. We really do just have one page left on chapter 31, but before we finally get to see the full form of the Future Devil, we get some redone cuts that recap everything leading up to it. In charge of these new cuts was storyboarder Makoto Nakazono, who drastically sped up the pace of Aki's arrival at the Future Devil's abode, likely because they knew exactly what the manga readers had been waiting a whole week for to finally see. The build-up for the reveal of the Future Devil is still just as impactful, just in a different way, and I think I can safely say that all that anticipation paid off, because devil designer Kiyotaka Oshiyama really did Fujimoto-san's design justice, as did voice actor Hirooki. I literally can't imagine a more perfect voice for this thing. Mappa did this introduction so well, and after this chapter ends and the opening plays is when we really get to see this guy in action, with a quirky little anime-only dance as chapter 32 gets underway. The enthusiasm this thing has for the future is downright contagious, but offsetting that with Aki's deadpan personality makes this scene infinitely more funny to me. Because of course Aki would be the one to get roped into the mischief of other devils, and seeing him accede to even the most strangest of commands is downright amusing to watch. The Future Devil certainly seems to be enjoying his time, and even more so when he discovers what the future holds for Aki. Naturally, that information isn't shared with us, even though the Future Devil was willing to reveal it after explaining the details of the contract. A contract that's oddly in Aki's favor, and with one removed line from the manga, the Future Devil says it's because Aki's death is gonna be horribly horrific. Aki probably should have listened to his fortune teller here, because his death might just have consequences outside of his own life. Which brings us right over to Denji, who just got finished with his final TKO of the day. Now, I'm sure many of you have finished season 1 of this show by this point, but without really spoiling anything, I will say that it's interesting that Denji's pants are shredded in this scene. Just a little bit of foreshadowing on how his training will pay off. It was training that Denji was initially pretty bummed out on, but has grown to be quite thankful for this old man and his hardened ways of teaching. Denji's not the only one too. Kishibe also admits some sort of connection with his students after all the torture he's put them through. It's quite fascinating actually that despite all of his talk about how being a little screw loose is the key to being a good devil hunter, he's still got a caring side himself. I guess there's only so much booze can do to quell those feelings. It really does seem like he doesn't want to lose Denji in power, hence the purpose of this visit with Makima to begin with. He said he's willing to stand by and let his trainees be killed as a result of Makima's scheming, but only as long as it's for the greater good. It's a subtle threat, but based off the end of this conversation, it's clear to Kishibe that Makima has much more suspicious motives in mind. And speaking of suspicious motives, now we'll move back over to the followers of the Gun Devil, who have posted up in a high-rise building, where it looks like there's some discourse as to where exactly they should be holed up. Sawatari understands fully by this point that they'll be under threat anyways since Makima's still alive, and the Katana Man seems to be hellbent on staying for Denji's heart regardless. So it seems like this will be where the final battle will be taking place after all. It's also the place where their trump card lies. And that is the power of zombies. It's gonna be quite the apocalyptic fight, but before we get into that, this next chapter will cover Aki and Makima's preparation for said fight. Okay, well Aki's pretty much done. He got his new contract by this point, but Kurose here still has some more words to share with him. And would you look at that, I got his name right this time. The dialogue between these two is unchanging from the manga, but I love how the vibe of this sequence is emphasized with half-face shots, tilted and low-angle shots, as well as shots of the road the anime alone had them hit a red light at once Kurose's chastisization of Aki came to a head. As usual, the direction here is very cinematic graphic, and it's incredible how much personality can be dissected from some superbly well-placed and executed shots. Before we know it, we're already back at Devil Hunter HQ, and it looks like Tendo had her window down when they dropped Aki off this time, because now he waits until after he closes his door to thank them for all their help. Pretty respectful after what he was just hit with, but really Kurose does have respect for Aki as well. It's just layered upon a different wealth of experience. I'm glad that they ended things off on a slightly more positive note, and I think Aki is too, thanks to that little anime-only smile he does before bowing. This part is actually pretty interesting because we finally get a reverse shot of where HQ is located, and it seems far less secure in the anime, but it does more closely match how easy it was for Makima to escort Denji to it for the first time in chapter 3. And speaking of Makima, now we'll move over to her half of this chapter as she gets some dealing straight with a mafia boss that seems to be from the same family Sawatari came from. He was more than willing to reveal information about her, considering that he didn't want to bear responsibility for her actions, but also drew a line when it came to talking about the other families, seeing as that could spew further trouble for him. Really, there's not too many changes changes in this section. The mafia boss got a cutter for his cigar this time and blew some smoke in Makima's face in the anime, but otherwise everything up to her eyeball gouging reveal is basically the same. As usual, we have no idea how Makima pulls off the things that she does, but it's that lack of transparency that's the truly scary part. At least she's not making people's heads explode this time around, but I still can't imagine the sort of havoc she's wreaking on everyone's insides. Just like last time, her role in this battle will be won from a distance as the local devil hunters get their hands dirty up close and personal on the main battlefield. It's outside of that main battlefield where things really start to differ, because while the manga does a little bit of foreshadowing here by showing what the matchups will be once everyone gets inside, the anime lines it out a little bit with some extra dialogue coming from Denji, Power, and Kobeni. They all seem to have their own thoughts on the upcoming battle, and Kobeni is obviously still as pessimistic as ever, but Denji can't seem to wait to get his rematch against the Katana Man. Despite Denji's optimism though, Aki still feels like he should ask Kishibe what the plan is here. Aki doesn't say that in the manga, but nonetheless this links us back up with the manga, where Kishibe says that there's no plan regardless, which will just about put a wrap on chapter 33. After that, we get some cool anime-only CCTV footage of Kishibe watching the first four of them enter the garage, leading us to the first page of chapter 34, where Kishibe is getting introduced to the other less important people of this raid. Though these two do give Kishibe a good reason to introduce the fiends that we have yet to meet in this show. And boy are they introductions to remember. This is when this episode really gets kicked into high gear with some pretty heavy-duty sakuga, so let's all break it down while discovering just how MAPPA's staff directed the introduction to these new characters. Starting with the Shark Fiend. His appearance above zombie-infested waters is just as rejoiceful as in the manga, as is the free dive he does right afterwards, except that dive has a lot more reach in the anime. He flies past a whole array of zombies this time, just so he can take an anime-exclusive dip into the floor further on instead of just piggybacking on the closest zombie he could find. No, the anime will first have him go for a brief swim before anything else, and I like how they made the passing lights reflecting off the floor appear as if he's a real shark stalking prey through dark waters. His emergence from those waters is when his devil form is officially unveiled, and might I say that this gremlin-style movement of his is extremely predatorial. The fast camera pans really emphasize just how unpredictably fast animals can be when they attack their prey. Prey that this shark fiend seems to like playing with based on how he randomly grabs a zombie during one of those quick pans just so that he could play a little game of catch with it later on. Once he's done with that game is when he rashly attacks a much more violent fiend than himself, an attack that he paid for dearly with a punch/kick to his mouth. This is our introduction to the Violence Fiend, and he's brought to the stage by none other than animator Yen BM, who also did some of the Shark Fiend cuts as well. I've spoken a lot about this animator in the past, not just because he's open to sharing his Genga, but because there's a certain flow to his work that just fits so perfectly with this series. His pose work and timing is just so graceful, and his smear frames are so tactfully placed, making every drawing feel powerful while still keeping the choreography tight and unyielding. I literally can't see the Violence Fiend being animated any other way, and I can't emphasize that enough. This sequence is probably my new favorite from this key animator because it's the sort of first impression that fits perfectly with this fiend. As opposed to the singular and only kick we see him do in the manga, his fighting style in the anime is more of an unrelenting combo breaker kind. One hit is already enough to obliterate, but he still spaces out his attacks to ensure that the maximum damage can occur before the final blow. You can tell that this animator felt a lot of inspiration for this character, and he really hammers down the impression that this is one fiend that you do not want to be in close proximity to, even though he seems pretty friendly otherwise. Not just to humans, but to even devils as well. Like the spider devil here that we just got introduced to. As someone who is not a fan of spiders, this one in particular runs a chill down my spine. And that's just from the manga, not the anime. That's another beast altogether. Curse you, Daniel Kim, for playing a part in this nightmare fuel. The way these legs extend completely out of sync with one another is just so creepy to watch. That makes this thing incredibly omnidirectional, but unlike normal spiders, this creature has some real weight to it, making those legs a real lethal force to anything caught in their path. Leatherface's daughter here can take out swaths of zombies at once, and all while looking mostly stationary from the waist up. Truly a terrifying concept, but she's not even the most bizarre one here. That title will have to go to the walking contradiction that is the Angel Devil. Some of his scenes were laid out by Twitter user Yamamimu Meno. Jeez. It's not much, but it certainly is fascinating how stand-in models are used for things like this. Say what you want about CGI, but it really can be useful for planning. But if anything, I think this layout is a prime example of how detail is only second to the construction of movement itself. Even though cuts like these take a backseat to the more in-your-face sort of stuff, its importance is just as noteworthy. It really is amazing that Mappa stayed faithful to manga layouts like this, even if it meant stretching the budget just a little bit more. There's so many moving parts to this cut that it's kinda hard to follow it all at once with a cursory glance, but believe it or not, their actions do intersect with one another. Like how the violence devil sends his prey flying for the shark devil to munch on. But really this is all just background noise for the first meetup of Aki and the angel devil. One thing you might not have known about Aki is that he's pretty ambidextrous, considering that he switched hands when getting a handkerchief ready for the angel devil to use. Something that the angel devil must have really appreciated since he gave Aki some cover from a surprise attack. This sequence is done by Kaito Tomioka, and he's one of the most well-rounded animators in Mappa's arsenal. I love how engaging his camera work and transition work is. From the way we fast pan upwards in the first cut where the camera then lightly follows the two bullets ricocheting off the angel's wings, to the way that the angel's wings act as a reveal for Aki running past the camera and onto the guy in front of him. For this cut, I actually have two pieces of production materials to share with you guys. One from Kaito Tomioka's layout, and another from Chief Animation Director Sota Yamazaki, who did the corrections. Unfortunately, it appears that his layout already had those corrections applied, but it always is interesting to see the little changes that occur throughout different production states. Key animators are definitely impressive, but the more ambitious they are, the more work for the animation directors, which is why there's usually multiple of them listed for each episode. Mappa wanted to make sure they had enough manpower to capitalize on the manga's eccentricity of its new character reveals after all. But for the next minute and a half or so, we're actually gonna take a break from adapting the manga and move into anime exclusive territory. See, normally after the angel devil relentingly accepts Aki's order, the manga would fast forward to Aki's fight with Sawatari, but instead the scene in the garage continues, with Aki issuing some more orders for the rest of them to split up and search for the targets. Director Ryu Nakayama must really like Aki's character, because pretty much any extra time he gets goes to this guy. Whether it's him in his morning routine, or just casually taking a stroll through the 4th floor of this building. Actually, I gotta wonder if he just randomly chose this floor, or he had some sort of foresight for the beef that would be on this level. In that respect, this sequence actually does have some significance to the plot, because not only does it give us a taste for Aki's Ultra Instinct prowess that he acquired from the Future Devil, but it also reminds us that Makima still has a place in this battle even though she's really far away. Personally, I'm glad the anime showed these scenes because it clarified how Makima finished up her business at the Mafia Mountain Resort earlier, while simultaneously hinting that Sawatari getting a bloody nose later on will be the likely result of it. And speaking of Sawatari, Aki has finally reached her in this dark passageway that feels like it should belong underground. Obviously, this is when we sync back up with the manga, but there are some adjustments here. Like how when Sawatari summons the regurgitative functions of her snake, we can clearly see her lost fingernails now, or how she no longer gets a nosebleed immediately but instead waits for Aki to curse her out first. Actually, there might be a chance that this nosebleed comes from excessive use of her power and not Makima, but I'll leave that up to you to decide. Either way, the re-emergence of the Ghost Devil is the final sight that ends out chapter 34, so without a moment's delay, let's move right on to the next chapter, where Aki really gets the chance to put his new devil abilities to the test. This is where the comparison kinda takes a back seat here, because in the anime the choreography sticks to its own rhythm, as opposed to the varying moments in time Aki cuts the oncoming ghost hands. But that's to be expected. What's more important is how it was adapted and executed, and well, people are gonna hate me for this, but I think it could have been done better. Let me emphasize that this work is still solid. It captures the progressiveness of Aki's struggle to keep up over time pretty well, but personally I think this fight would benefit with some more in-betweening work. Though maybe it just comes down to my subjective taste on how the posing is done. Like Aki's fight against the Katana Man, I'm sensing a lot of the same haphazard refinement that defines Aki's fighting style, but there isn't that same sort of weight to back it up. Really, this show has spoiled us because it's built on the premise of high key counts, and while I'm not denying that there's enough frames here to satisfy many, the gap in between them kind of offsets it with the type of character movement that this series is known for, at least in my eyes. It feels uncharacteristically floaty without ample breakdown frames, but on the plus side, that does do well to emphasize Aki's uncomfortableness when fighting with an unfamiliar ability, especially for an enemy that attacks as much as this one does. That's a lot of on-screen elements to keep track of, but just like when the Katana Man fought off these things, I will say that the blood that emanates from them is just as satisfyingly disturbingly grotesque, as is the way the hands are split apart to begin with. Composition might not do these cuts any major favors, but I do appreciate the very light blood CGI to break up the timing of these keys a little bit. Most of this stuff is done on 2s and 3s after all, so anything to smooth out the final picture is nice. Honestly, the speed of this fight might be a bit too much for those frame times, but when Aki slows down a bit, that's when things really start to shine. Like this cut of Aki cutting an arm clean down the center. It's actually the only cut I managed to find production materials of, and while it might only be the correction materials, it's definitely given me a greater appreciation for the animation directors. You can really feel every ounce of Aki's struggle here. I also really like this cut of Aki sliding back not too long afterwards. That's the sort of movement I adore, because this show is built upon that grounded and hefty style, and that's what makes its direction so prominent. In addition to all the little extra things they add, like how we now see the Future Devil's eyes within Aki's eye, or how the final strike by the Ghost Devil, which is now an open hand instead of a fist, didn't impale Aki because his uniform is supposed to be resilient, which is exactly why they aim for the neck. With a grip strength that strong, Aki's reaction is exactly what one would expect, with the way he flails around while his Future Devil eye goes frantic from the lack of air. This is some really dreadful key placement. It certainly leaves a lasting impression, but despite the fact that this is where the episode leaves us off, we're still only on page 6 of chapter 35. But that'll have to be for the next video, which I promise to get out before the new age arises. I wouldn't want to miss it for the world, because it's directed by Ryu Nakayama, the primary director for this show, and he had some very interesting sequences to share. But while I find the time to work on that, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then I'd appreciate it if you guys could support me in any way you're able, and get subscribed if you haven't already. Once again, another shout out to my lovely friends on Patreon, and I hope everyone, including you, has a fantastic day. Well, that's it for me. This is Registry, signing off. Take care, everyone.